Hey everyone, welcome to Love with Francesca, where we deep dive into relationships, self-love, and the empowering journey to authentic connection and healing. Today, I have a lovely friend of mine here with us today. I just said today twice. We got this. But Christy, thank you so much for being here and for agreeing to be on this podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So Christy, similarly are you a therapist or a social worker? I forget.
I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in New York.
Y'all, she's a licensed mental health counselor in New York, so she knows what she's talking about. So, and she's also in coaching, and I love the type of people that you help. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you, what inspired you to do what work you do, and what inspired you to do that work?
So as you were mentioning, so I am now in the coaching space, after having been a therapist for a very long time.
Mhm.
And so, in my coaching, I am primarily working with, stressed out moms who have demanding careers, and I'm helping them to overcome all those challenges that come along with being a working mom, because there are so many, and so when the mom guilt that's always there, the resentment that they might be feeling, all of those sorts of things, so many times moms are feeling, they're filled with self-doubt, questioning their decisions, and then a lot of times these things are spilling over into their relationships at home. So that's the population that I've really been working with.
Mhm.
And just to kind of give you a little bit of background in terms of how I
Yeah.
landed on that. So again, so as you obviously know, I'm a therapist. And so when I was first out of graduate school, I worked as a therapist for a long time in a mental health agency. I was at the agency for about 9 years. Things were going really well. Like, I worked as a therapist. I had eventually moved into management. I worked in many different programs within the agency. I had a great relationship with my boss. Like, things were going really well. Things were moving up, and it was stressful. Mental health agencies have a tendency to be very high burnout environments.
Hmm.
But I was managing, but then fast forward and however many years it was, and I had my daughter, and things just they really changed. My priorities shifted because even though work was still important, it was no longer the only important thing. And
Hmm.
so I really had to figure out how I was going to manage both things. And the thing about being a first time mom is that you have an idea of what you think it's going to be like, and then it's totally different. And there were just so many things that nobody had told me about. There were things that I was not mentally prepared for. And so when I got into it, suddenly I had to figure out, like, how am I going to juggle both of these things, because I didn't want to give up my career, but also I had this like tiny human that I had to take care of. And so, I eventually, and then I started to like deal with all these things like the mom guilt. Like, so one of the things, for example, is that I was bringing my daughter to daycare for 11 hours a day, which is something I was not prepared for. I came from a family of stay-at-home moms. I was the first one, working and using daycare. As a newborn, she was going to bed by like 6 p.m. So I would get home, I would maybe have an hour with her if I was lucky, and then I was sending her to bed. And so I would feel guilty around that. And that's just an example. Like, there were so many other
Yeah.
things. But then the other part of it is that so much of the responsibility for taking care of kids falls on the mom. Even women who have supportive husbands, a lot of times it really doesn't feel balanced. And so
Mhm.
what was happening is, I mean, my husband is great. He's a great husband, he's a great father. He would help out where he could, but it wasn't always balanced, and he wasn't always able to understand my perspective and where I was coming from. There would be times when he would come home from work and he would, sit down on the couch when I was already there doing the stuff with the baby, and he would sit down on the couch and start looking at his phone for a couple minutes. And I would get so angry at him. And,
Mhm.
and we would argue. And eventually I realized that what he was doing wasn't wrong. Like, he just needed a few minutes so that he could so that he could recharge so that then he could be in a position to help me. But
Mhm.
at the time, I wasn't necessarily able to see that, and
Mhm.
so eventually, um, as I continued to work on myself, as I continued to work with my therapy clients who were dealing with similar things, I realized, how common these struggles are and that there are ways to deal with them, to make them better. Some of it's about practical skills like communication. Some of it's around shifting our own mindsets, like I said, with the example about, recognizing his self-care and that that's really okay. And I just decided that I wanted to take all of these things that I was learning and I wanted to help these moms because I really believe that there are so many moms out there dealing with this, not necessarily talking about it, but they are out there dealing with it. So I wanted to offer them that support.
I love that. Thank you for sharing all that and also kind
You're
of like
welcome.
including your own personal story in it. I think it's really important to I think just like acknowledge that, right? Because oftentimes we as therapists are trained to kind of be like a blank slate. And what I love about the coaching space is that I get to share like, hey, I've also been through this. Like I know what I'm talking about because I put in all the effort of understanding how to get out of this. And that's why I want to share all this with you so that you can maybe do it a little bit faster than I had to do it because mine
Mhm.
was through trial and error, right? So,
Mhm.
and I just love that you chose to kind of take a situation that was really hard for you and turn it into something that's beneficial for other people and you can be of support to them, especially adding on like all the therapeutic expertise that you have.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and I'm just thinking too, like as you were sharing, there's so many moms that I can think of that I've either worked with or women in my family that I've observed that had similar situations. And I think especially probably for your generation more than mine, if you're like a first-time career and mom, I think that's
Mhm.
really challenging. And I imagine the women that you work with struggle with this because you don't necessarily have that many role models of how to navigate that balance.
Mhm.
And you might also have role models that judge and criticize this balance that you're trying to create. Like they're like, either be the career or be the mom. And you're like, no,
Mhm.
I want to be both, but I
Mhm.
just need help figuring out how to be both.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, as I had mentioned before, I came from a family of stay-at-home moms. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She went back to work eventually, but when we were little, she stayed home with us. My sister stays home with her kids. She is also, working now, but when they were really little, she was staying home. And other women in my life too. And so for me, it was a brand new thing. I just and honestly, I give them so much credit because stay-at-home moms have an impossibly hard job too. But I think
Yes.
that it's hard in different ways,
Yes.
and I think like most things, I was very fortunate that the women in my life are very supportive of me working. I don't feel like they're judging me. I think
Yeah.
judgment maybe comes from other places, sometimes in society and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel very fortunate that I'm not getting that from them. However, I also think that, like most things, unless you are in a situation yourself personally, you can
Yeah.
try to understand it and you can try to empathize, but it's hard to really get it. Just like I can't necessarily really understand how it is for them to be home with their kids, like
Yeah.
I would imagine that it's also harder for them to really understand, what it's like for me to
A hundred
deal with
percent.
all of these challenges. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard. And again, I think that to your point, this is something that more and more women are starting to navigate, way more than, all those
Yeah.
before, like my parents'
Yeah.
generation.
Totally, totally.
Mhm.
And so you were saying earlier, and I agree with you that like, um, let's see if I can remember correctly. You were saying earlier how there's a lot of women that are experiencing this, but don't necessarily know how to navigate it or deal with it. What do you think? What do you think they're struggling with? Like, what do you think stops them from asking for help?
Well, I think that there are a lot of things. So,
Mhm.
for starters, I think that there are a lot of expectations that we've sort of been conditioned to believe. So for starters, backing up, obviously,
Mhm.
the workforce for women has changed,
Mhm.
over time. And there was a time when it was much more common for them to stay at home and for, the man to go out and bring in the money and things like that.
Mhm.
And now, as more and more women are going outside of the home to work, I think the expectations, like it's progress. I think expectations are shifting, but I don't necessarily think that they have shifted proportionately with the way, with the way that roles and expectations are changing. And I think that a lot of women do have this expectation that it is their job to do it all. That saying, you're expected to work as if you don't have kids and raise your kids as if you don't work. And so I think a lot of times women feel like they have to be everything to everybody all the time. And so I think that it makes it hard for them sometimes to really ask for help. Because I think that when they ask for help, sometimes they feel like maybe they are failing at something, things like that. And that just constantly facing the pressure of the messages that are coming in all, like from all directions in society, that we have to be able to do all these things and do them well and, you know, take care of ourselves and look amazing while we're doing
That's so true.
it.
And thank you for kind of reframing it that way. Because I think it's important to understand the way in which like the environment in which we grew up really creates the unspoken expectations that we then kind of absorb and internalize and make our own. And so it becomes, like you said, it becomes so difficult to ask for help if asking for help in some way means that you have failed at what you were supposed to do.
Hmm.
And I think another issue to that is that if we don't have awareness of like or enough security and like who we are in our identity, is that then if we feel like we've failed a role that we have, we then feel like we failed as people and we are
Hmm.
failures. And so that's where like
Hmm.
the shame really kicks in and the guilt really kicks in. And the last thing that someone's going to do when they feel like it's their fault that something went bad is go ask for help, because you don't even feel like you deserve to go ask for help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also think along with that, as I had mentioned before, I think a lot of these women are dealing with feelings of self-doubt and, what questioning whether they are doing a good enough job, as moms in their roles at home. And I think a lot of it is because they do, one, we have those expectations, but two, I think that a lot of times people do feel judged or they do find themselves
Mhm.
comparing to other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Social media can be a wonderful thing in some ways, but
Yeah.
in other ways it can be really terrible. And this is one of those ways, is that we're constantly sort of seeing other people posting things about their lives and making it look like they're managing all these things and they're doing it in such a, an easy way that it makes us
Hmm.
start to question, well, where am I going wrong? Why can't I do this? Why am I having such a hard time? And it just sort of like feeds into those questions and those feelings of self-doubt.
Totally, totally. As if there's like something wrong with you that you can't like seamlessly be an amazing mom and an amazing career woman. And like you said, look perfect all at the same time. And like
Hmm.
also show up with like the home baked cookies for the whatever, school gathering.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
absolutely.
just it becomes so much pressure, and like there's only 24 hours in a day.
Hmm.
And so that becomes really impossible to, I can't even imagine. Like I'm sitting here listening to you and I don't have any kids. And I mean, I do have a career, but I kind of work for myself. So I choose my own hours, and I'm
Hmm.
sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, that sounds so difficult. Like
Hmm.
manage all of that. And I see my friends that have children and I'm just like, oh, let's give it a few more years. We're not ready for that yet. So then it's like if we have to put everything on top of each other.
Hmm.
And do you think there's like I think there's just like a question that kind of pops up in my mind, but do you think there's like a certain type of person that's kind of predisposed given maybe difficulties they already had or beliefs they already have about themselves that they're already kind of predisposed to having a really hard time managing those different roles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's tricky because we all come
Mhm.
from different walks of life. And I think
Mhm.
that, the things that we are taught, the things that we experience, all of those things affect our mindsets, affect our ability to really like cope with challenges and difficult situations. And so,
Yeah,
I think that people who maybe um don't have a great support system, they could be, have more challenges around these things. People who maybe have lower self-esteem or who have learned along the way or been taught along the way that maybe they're not good enough in some way. I think
hmm,
that those are people that are probably going to struggle more with this because the
yeah,
reality is that managing all of this, juggling all these things, and feeling emotionally well, a lot of it has to do with our mindsets, and that's one of
yeah,
the things that I really like to help people with because there are strategies that we can do, time management, communication, all those things are really important. But
sure.
also, I think that there are things that obviously we can't control. There are things that we just kind of have to deal with. And
Yeah,
so like being able to understand and um shift our mindset where it's where it's needed or where it's necessary can be really important.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I don't know if that answered your
I'll get
question.
back to my point. Don't you worry, but I appreciate what you're sharing because I think it's so true, right? Like you can learn the strategies and you can know what to do and you can learn how to plan your schedule, but if you have a certain mindset, like a certain negative self-belief about yourself, you're gonna end up like sabotaging your own ability to follow that perfect schedule that you had created for yourself. And so
Mhm.
I think that's where support like yours or having a community around you or things like that is so helpful because you do have to do kind of like that deeper work in order to be able to even do the things that would help you in the situation. But I appreciate your question, and it's not at all to like and just to clarify, I think you understood me, but for anyone that's listening, it's not at all to kind of blame the person in the situation, like the woman that's going through this. I think it's more so to like highlight that I could see how managing these different roles and expectations, if you already are vulnerable to struggling with this sort of thing, like I could imagine how these different roles would exacerbate whatever you're already struggling with.
Mhm.
Especially like I think yours, like you said, like you were very blessed to have people that supported you and a husband that was supportive, right? But it's like if we're thinking about people that like don't have a support system around them, people that don't have a supportive partner in their household that are also like critical of them as critical they are of themselves, or I'm thinking of like, so I come from Italy and Dominican Republic, and there's some areas of these countries where, you know, most likely your family's not going to be on board with you being a career mom. Like,
Mhm.
let's just put it plain and simple like that.
Mhm.
And so I think also culturally, like you grew up and there's certain expectations and you're defying those expectations. And then you kind of come face to face with like having to battle not just the external expectations, because like whatever, you can kind of tell someone to like F off if they're judging you, but you can't really tell yourself to F off if you're judging yourself. And I think
Mhm.
that's where the trap becomes, and that's where you have like those like internal conflicts where it becomes even harder to do all these different roles if at the same time you're also struggling within yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when you talk about, expectations from family and you're talking
Yeah,
about like this internal struggle, and yeah, that can be a really tough battle. And that's
yeah,
why, again, sort of like working on, like recognizing that as a challenge and working on shifting the mindset can be so important. And
yeah,
if you do have, a positive support system, leaning on them where you can. Unfortunately, that's something that a lot of people don't have.
yeah,
And the thing about that too is you can have a support system from a distance, where people are encouraging you or maybe not, but the thing is that even if you have a support system from a distance and the people in your life are encouraging,
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily help with the immediate day-to-day challenges that a lot of times
Yeah.
these women deal with.
Yeah.
So, they always talk about how like it takes a village to raise kids. But the
Yeah.
thing is that not everybody has a village. I can
Mm.
personally say that I have a very supportive family, but they don't live locally to me.
Yeah.
I have like very few family who lives locally, and my friends they're busy themselves. They have their own lives. They have a lot going on. And so the thing is that as I'm trying to juggle all these challenges, a lot of times when things come up, when my kids get sick or whatever it might be, it is on my husband and I to figure these things out for ourselves, which can
Hmm.
be incredibly stressful and frustrating and difficult. And again, something else that I think so many people have, deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. There's someone I'm thinking of that I work with, that career mom, great husband, like he's super involved. But still, like it's a lot, and they have support. They have both one set of grandparents that live right next to them. They have a set of grandparents that come visit them often, and it's still so much. And I think, kind of similar to what we were saying earlier, a lot of the work that we do is just helping her like have some compassion for herself when she is struggling and when things aren't going perfectly. And it's just like contextualizing it. Like, I think sometimes we focus on like one thing that we need to do, and we're like, shit, I didn't do this well. And it's like, okay, but you're only focused on this one little thing. You're forgetting that you have a bajillion other things on your plate. And
Hmm.
so it may like you're juggling so many different things. One of them might fall once in a while.
And that's okay. And that's
Yeah.
the thing, is a lot of times I think something falls, and that's where we start to think like, oh shoot, why can't I do this? Did I like, okay, now I'm failing at something. But the
Yeah.
reality is that sometimes they do have to fall, and that is okay, especially when the expectations that we have are so high, and quite frankly, for most people are not entirely realistic. We cannot
Yeah.
be everything to everybody all the time. Like there has to be some give somewhere.
100%. And I find that I love, like, I'm like, I want to just clip what you said and be like, everyone needs to listen to this like a million times on repeat, especially for women. Because even as someone who doesn't even have children, doesn't even have like, a 9 to 8 p.m. corporate career, whatever, I think just as a woman, we struggle with the idea that we have to be available for everyone always.
Hmm.
And that was something that, I don't know if it even led to burnout, but that was something that I really struggled with. And I'd love to get into the topic of resentment. I think kind of bringing us there is that if I believe that I have to be everything for everyone, and I'm always giving and I'm always, available and everything, eventually I'm going to become so resentful, because most likely the other person or people in my life, they don't necessarily have that same expectation of themselves.
Hmm.
And so I'm just like giving, 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 giving. My cup is just emptying, like just
Hmm.
draining. And then
Hmm.
nothing is being refilled. And all my energy is going outwards. And it's like, wait, maybe we can redirect that a little bit towards ourselves. However,
Hmm.
I want to ask you, in practice, how does that work for someone who just has like so much to do in a day? Because I think that's where women struggle. They're like, yeah, yeah, self-care, sure, but like when and where? When I'm a
Yeah,
mom.
no, that's a really good question. And I think the thing is that self-care, so backing up to your
Yes.
point from before, we
Yes.
have 24 hours in a day.
Right.
Everybody has the same 24 hours, and we have to fit all the things that we want into those 24 hours, and it never feels like there's enough time. And so when we do run out of time to do all the things, a lot of times the first thing to go is our self-care. That gets put at the bottom of the list, for so many people. And so I think that a lot of people say, yes, self-care is important, but to your
Mhm.
point, are they fitting it in? Are they making it a priority? A lot of times.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
one of the things that I really encourage people to do is to think about. So, for starters, I think it can be helpful as an exercise just to sort of take an inventory on how you're spending your
Hmm.
time in your day. Because if
Hmm.
you're putting time towards one thing, it means you're taking time away from something else. And so, just sort of really look at the importance and the value of the things that you are doing, and just sort of seeing like kind of like budgeting your finances a little bit, right? Sort of looking at like where are these things important and what things can I maybe take away from, just to sort of see if there are gaps of time in your day, or there could be. But one of the
Mm,
things that I a lot of times encourage people to do is to be very intentional about it. So, for starters, try to set realistic goals and expectations for yourself. So, maybe before kids, maybe you were working out 6 days a week, and now that just feels impossibly hard. So, start off with something small that feels realistic and achievable. Maybe it's 1 day a week, maybe it's 2 days a week, maybe it's 15 minutes instead of an hour, because you really want to start off by doing something that's going to feel that you're going to be successful at, because
yeah.
that's what's going to encourage you to keep going. And then put it in your calendar, put it in your schedule, and treat it like an appointment that can't be missed. So I think about it, and sometimes I think about, going to the dentist, for example.
Mhm,
I don't want to go to the dentist, but I see that it's important. I know that it's valuable. When I schedule that appointment, I put it in there and I schedule everything else around it. Now, if an
mhm,
emergency comes up, of course, I'm going to cancel that appointment. But
mhm.
otherwise, I'm going to make sure that I go. And so I encourage people to sort of think about their self-care in the same way, like put it in your calendar and treat it like an appointment that can't be missed. And that by like actually putting it in there, it can just
Yeah,
help people feel more committed to it. But the
yeah,
other thing that I want to sort of remind people about is that self-care does not have to mean all this time, that we don't feel like we have. It can literally be 5 minutes here and there in your day. Like if you
yeah.
are at work, you can get up and take a walk around the office for 5 minutes. You can sit there and do some deep breathing exercises. You
Mhm,
can, take a couple minutes, and if you like writing or drawing or whatever, do something like that. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So it doesn't get a healthy snack.
yeah,
None of these things have to be huge time commitments. And I think a lot of
right.
times people think if I don't have an hour, I can't
Yeah,
do it. And so then they don't
yeah,
bother.
totally, totally. And I love the examples that you gave. And if I can add to, it's like, well, first of all, the whole, putting it in your calendar as an appointment, I think is really helpful. That's something that I've learned to do when it comes to my own self-care, because I think if you just think about wanting to do it, but you don't actually like put it in there, it's like you have to see it in the calendar and value it and respect it, like you said, as an appointment, because it's a way of valuing and respecting yourself
Mm-hmm.
and being like, I'm going to show up for myself in the same way that I show up for my kids, for my husband, for my work, for my mom, for everyone else in my life. And I'm going to give myself the same importance that I give them. And I'm going to, it's like such a simple little thing, but you do when you see it in the calendar and then you have to make the effort to make things work around that.
Mm-hmm.
It just like mentally, it's like a reminder of like, I'm important, I'm worthy of dedicating this time to myself, even if it's 10 minutes, like you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is that, like you were saying, self-care doesn't have to take a lot of time. And I think also there's a lot of like mental self-care that we can do
Mm-hmm.
that takes literally no time. Maybe takes 20 seconds. Even something like, oh shit, I forgot this meeting. Like yesterday, I forgot to put up a blog. I sent out my blogs on Thursday and I forgot to send out my blog. And I noticed how the self-care isn't in like, oh, I'm gonna go like take a bubble bath. It's like, I'm gonna be kind to myself and I'm not gonna horribly judge myself and criticize myself for having forgot to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm gonna send out a blog letting people know that I forgot to do this and this is what I practice. And I encourage you to practice the same thing. But
Mm-hmm.
that's really cool about my work that I get to do that. But yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's like such simple little ways that even just mentally you can practice. I think self-care can also just be like being kind to yourself,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
which I imagine a lot of these moms struggle with.
They do. Yeah, no, I mean, and to your point, when people talk about self-care, I think a lot of people have an idea of what that means and what that looks like.
Yeah.
And if they don't feel like they can fit that in particular, then
Hmm.
then they then they just don't do it at all. And to your point, like there can be so many different ways to take care of ourselves
Yeah.
that might not seem as obvious, and that really do not have to be this huge time commitment. The other thing that I really encourage people to think about
Hmm.
is thinking about self-care instead of time spent, I always encourage people to think about it in terms of time invested. Because when
Mm,
we think about investing in something, what we're doing is we're spending something in the hopes that we're going to get something back. And so if we're thinking like, okay, well, I'm going to go to bed an hour early and now I'm just going to lose that hour. I have an hour less to do everything else. Maybe you're going to be less motivated to do it. But what happens though, I always encourage people to think about what happens though when you do go to bed an hour earlier.
mhm.
How does that affect you the next day? Now you're more rested, you're more energized, you're more productive. And so that hour that you put into sleeping, it was an investment in your time, it was an investment in yourself because the hope is the next day you're going to get so much back.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like it. It sounds like what I'm hearing from you in this conversation is like there's so many little mindset shifts that we
Hmm.
can make
Hmm.
that just make the day flow a little bit easier.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's something where people have a really hard time with, unfortunately. But the good
Yes.
thing is that
Yeah.
learning to shift our mindset is something that really anybody can do. It's a skill, and like
Hmm.
anything, first we have to build, gain that awareness and then learn how to do the skill and then practice how
Yeah.
to do the skill. And then we can, then we can hopefully
Then you
do the
master
skill.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then you
exactly.
master it and then it
Yeah.
becomes automatic. Like as a
Yeah.
recovering perfectionist, yeah, the fact that I was able to immediately be kind to myself yesterday took years in the making. Like it's not,
Hmm.
it didn't happen automatically. It took a
Yeah.
lot of work to get there. But you're right. Like once it becomes, it's like you want to replace that automatic system to be a system that automatically spits out kindness,
Hmm.
self-compassion, self-forgiveness, like just
Yeah.
immediately all that stuff.
Hmm.
Speaking of, can we chat about mom guilt for a second?
Of course.
Tell me about mom guilt. Like, how do we work through it? Does it ever go away?
Well, so for starters, mom guilt, I think, is so common. I
Yeah.
think that it's something that probably all moms experience at some time or another. And it's really hard. And I think that it's important to manage expectations, not to necessarily expect it to entirely go away, but what we want to do is we want to make it feel easier. We want to make it feel more manageable, have less of it. When we do notice ourselves experiencing it, to be able to make those mindset shifts so that we are able to be a little bit easier on ourselves. So, because the thing is when we're feeling guilty about something, a lot of times really what's going on is that we are either telling ourselves that we've done something wrong, or
Hmm.
maybe we are telling ourselves that we have not met somebody else's expectations. Maybe we're letting them down in some way. And
Hmm.
so it's really those mindset things that can play into this. And so one of the things that I really encourage people to do when they notice themselves feeling guilty is to sort of take a step back and try to pay attention to what is going on with themselves. What are some of the things that they're telling themselves that are, playing into this guilt? And then trying to to challenge that, right?
Yeah.
So if I don't know, if you're feeling guilty because let's say that
Say
you
you're like on a work trip and you missed your kids, like, school five, 5-year-old kindergarten recital, whatever, like, because you
yeah.
had a seminar you had to go present at. Like,
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
Well, so for starters, I think that
Yeah.
again, sort of paying attention to what is some of the self-talk that's going on that's playing into that, but
Mm,
then also, and sort of asking yourself, am I feeling guilty because I believe I'm doing something wrong? Do I feel guilty because I believe I'm letting my child down in some way? And then again,
mhm.
really trying to challenge that and one sort of remind yourself of the reasons that you're making these choices, right? So if
Mm,
you are at your work trip, if your conference, like what is the value in that? What is the importance? That's not to suggest that it's more important than what's going on with your kids, but
yeah.
that we have more than one important thing going on in our lives. And also reminding ourselves why our work is important, not just for us, but for our kids. And
Yeah.
I think that it's also, and at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to be at everything,
Mhm.
but our kids are going to be okay. They really are. If we have to miss the occasional thing, like they're going to be okay. And so just reminding ourselves of that. and again, the reasons that we're doing these things. And I think it's also important to sort of remember that feeling disappointed, feeling sadness, like those are normal, natural human emotions. And that's different than feeling guilty, right? And so we can recognize that we're not doing anything wrong. We can recognize that we're doing things for good reasons that are going to benefit our whole family, and
Mhm.
also feel disappointed that we're missing something. Like two things can be true at the same time.
I love that. I think what I really got from what you were saying is the importance of like take a beat, take a second, reflect on what you're feeling and thinking, and get curious about that a little bit. Like, I
Mhm.
think the issue is that when we feel guilt, or, any kind of like hard, challenging emotion, we kind of act out of impulse. We're like, okay, well, I guess I can't take the meeting, or we're not present. So then you're like at the seminar and you're like stressed the whole time and you're feeling so upset and you don't even like do a good job doing your own presentation because you're so worried about like Billy back home at his little league or whatever they're called
Mhm.
things. And or like, yeah, or maybe we like force ourselves to miss out on opportunities, um and then we develop resentment. And that becomes even more challenging, right? So I think I love what you're saying, because it's also like once you do all that kind of work, it's also let's go back to getting grounded in our values and what's important to us, and making decisions that are aligned to our values, which is
Mhm.
a hard thing to do.
Yeah, and I also think that it's important to remember too that sometimes our work is going to feel like the more important thing, and other times what's going on at home might feel like the more important thing.
Hmm.
And obviously, at the end of the day, our kids are super important.
Yeah,
And if we take time away from them, to prioritize or to focus on these other things, they're still going to be okay.
yeah,
And there are going to be times when we absolutely need to place more focus and emphasis on home, on our kids, if they're sick or whatever it might be. But then there are other times when they are okay. Maybe they're just happy
yeah,
living their lives, doing whatever.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and at that time, maybe your work is going to feel more important. And that's like those are the kinds of choices that I feel like we're having to make all the time.
Totally, totally. And there's also like so many ways to make someone feel loved. Like it's not just
Mhm.
by your presence. There's
Mhm.
a bajillion ways to make someone feel
Yeah.
loved. So I
Yeah.
think it's cool to kind of remember that.
Well, and I think you actually just made me think about this too. Another
Hmm.
important thing to remember is that quality of time is more important than quantity of time. I
Yeah,
think sometimes people feel like they constantly need to be at their kids' things and home with their kids and doing all these things, but if if their heads are back at work and they're focused on all the other things they have to do, then that time is not going to be as meaningful for them.
that's
It's
so
not
true.
really going to nurture that relationship in the same way. I think what can be more helpful is get your things done, do the things you need to do, leave work at work, and
Yeah,
then maybe the time that you're spending with your kids is shorter. But
yeah.
if you can then be fully present and really enjoy and appreciate that time with them, that's ultimately going to be much more helpful for the relationship.
That's so true. There's a friend of mine whose dad has a really, important big career job, corporate job. And I was so impressed. We would take like he was very, generous. He would like invite us on their little family trips. She was my roommate, so they'd come visit her and we would go to like we'd go like hiking for a weekend or something. And I was so impressed how I mean, he works so much and, he has a big important job and it's very stressful in many different situations. And there was one day where he was on a work call in the other room, and you could tell that it was stressful. And the work call ended. And I think I heard him like take a deep breath or something, just kind of like center himself and ground himself. And then he came into the room and he was like, "Hey everyone, how's it going? How was your day hiking? How was your morning? How was your this?" And he was so involved in the conversation. And when we were sitting at dinner, he was never on his phone. He was never like checking other stuff. He was like so present, so engaged, so curious about even like me, who like I'm not even his daughter, I'm just like his daughter's friend, whatever, but and And that was so cool to see that because it really prove to me what you're saying right now of like just because you're a busy corporate, important human being doesn't mean that you can't create those meaningful, impactful relationships with your kids or even their friends. It's just about,
Hmm.
like you said, like if you're there, be there. And if you
Hmm.
can't be there, then maybe don't be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that that's a great example because again, there are some times when, people are going to come home from work and they're going to be on their cell phones or they're going to be thinking about, oh, I have to check that email or when am I going to get this project done? How am I going to fit that in today? And if that's what they're focusing on, then yes, you're physically there, but
Yeah,
maybe not mentally and emotionally. So
no,
just take care of the things, do the things you need to do so that when you can be with your kids, like you can really be there.
totally, totally. Thank you so much. Is there anything that I didn't ask you? Any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I feel like I could talk about these things all day.
Me too.
But I mean, I think the final thing I would just say, and I know we've already sort of touched on this, is I just
Yeah.
really encourage these people to just be kind to themselves, like you said, be
Hmm.
patient. Remember that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not do everything all the time and be everything to everybody all the time because we're human. These expectations are really high. They're not usually very realistic, and it's okay to be human and it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to be vulnerable. And that does not mean that you're failing. It does not mean that you are not doing good at your job or you're not being a good mom or anything like that. It simply means that you're human and you're doing the best you can.
I love that. It's so humbling when you're just like, I'm just a human. I'm just trying my best. And that's
Hmm.
okay.
Hmm. And I feel
That's
like
beautiful.
that's all we're ever doing is just we're doing the best we can, one day at a time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
seriously. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Christy. This was so, I mean, even as someone who's not a mom right now, hopefully will be in the future, I feel like it's even helpful for me to hear these things and just remind myself and be like, okay, just be a little bit nicer to yourself. Like it's okay,
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing all your kindness with us. Where can people find you?
Yes, well, and for starters, I want to say thank you so much
Yeah,
for having me.
yeah.
So anybody who would like to chat more or, is looking to find me. So for starters, I want to mention that I do have a free Facebook group. It's called Thrive as a Career-Driven Mom, where I am constantly doing live trainings to talk about, these free live trainings every week to talk about a number of different things that these working moms are having a hard time with. And I'm trying to put out like other advice and resources and things like that. So I invite anybody to join who thinks that that might be helpful for them. And also, I have my website, so which is christigymrcoaching.com. It's a little bit tricky to spell, so hopefully I imagine you'll be able to find it in the notes.
It'll
The
be in the
last
show
name,
notes.
the
Click
last name.
directly the show notes so you can find it.
Yes, yes. So you can find me on my website. And then my Instagram is Career Driven Mom. So if anybody would like to chat or would like additional support, I encourage you to check out those things.
I love that. I definitely recommend signing up for your Facebook group. I mean, we're better than to get to know you and see the kind of support you can offer than, watching all that free content that you share. So thank you so much, Christy. Thank you for being here. And for anyone that found this conversation helpful, feel free to do all the things like subscribe, follow, share this conversation with a mom in your life that maybe needs to hear it, or even maybe for yourself, like learning how to support the women in your life, or just I think generally just like the parents in your life because they need a lot of help and love and support. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.